Welcome to the Anxiety to Empowerment YouTube channel. I'm really excited to get started today. This is my very first video here, although I've definitely been thinking about doing a YouTube channel for a while. We'll talk about what my holdups were because it plugs into a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about here in terms of empowerment and trusting yourself. We'll get to that stuff later. First, hi, my name is Amanda. I am an anxiety coach and I specialize in personal empowerment and spiritual development. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different things on this channel: mental health, spirituality, meditation, all of that good stuff. But for today, I wanted to focus on anxiety, right? Let's build from the ground up. So in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about my perspective on anxiety, what it actually means, and how we start to interrupt the process of our anxious thoughts. One thing I will say, I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. I'm a coach. I'm a person who struggled with anxiety for a really long time, and I'm someone who used a lot of tools and a lot of learnings and a lot of data to help myself feel better. So my job, my goal in sharing this is just to empower you on your own healing journey. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If this video is helpful for you in any way, please feel free to share it, send it to a friend, whatever you want to do. My job, my mission is just to help and talk to as many people as possible. So if you want to be a part of that process, I would really appreciate it. So let's talk about anxiety. The way that I view anxiety is that it is a physical symptom of our soul trying to get our attention. Another way of saying that is that I look at anxiety as the tip of the iceberg. So when we're experiencing the physical symptoms of anxiety, it's usually an indication that there's something under the surface that we're not looking at or addressing. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example, and then we're going to kind of break it down together. An example might be if you are texting a guy or a girl or a person that you're really into, and all of a sudden they stop responding, right? And so maybe you feel that first wave of how you experience anxiety, whether that is tension in the chest or a pit in the stomach, where you start to get really, really wound up in your thoughts. So you feel that, and all of a sudden you're in this anxious state and you're starting to respond to the world in an anxious state, meaning maybe you actually shut in, maybe you go into overdrive and start reaching out more. That can look very different for different people, but you're feeling the anxiety, right? And we want to look at that. So why did the lack of a message coming through, or maybe in this example, lack of a message coming through in a timely manner, why did that trigger you? Is it so much about the person, or is it triggering something deeper? Is it triggering a lack of belief in yourself? Is it triggering this idea that maybe you aren't worth it? Is it triggering abandonment or rejection or any of those other fears? Okay? So this is why I say anxiety can be the tip of the iceberg, because it's physical first, and then what happens is our mind starts to connect it to things that have happened to us in the past. So I want to break that down, and then we're going to talk about the delayering process too. So what happened in that example was you had this physical response to an external stimuli. Your body, the physical sensations, told your brain that something was wrong, and then the mind wants to go and fixate on something. This is really important to understand, because when we're feeling anxious or we experience a trigger in our outside or internal world, because sometimes triggers can just be thoughts, right? When we feel triggered, our mind immediately is going to look for what is wrong. It is going to look for something to fixate on. Now, if you're like, I do that all the time, it's not your fault. This is human nature. Our minds, I'll get into this in another video, but our minds are designed to look for the negative. You can think about it as like a protective animal instinct. We needed that as a feature when we were evolving as a species. But now that we have lives and jobs and complicated realities, our tendency to seek the negative obviously doesn't serve us all the time. So it can feel like we're locked in this, like, oh, I always go to the negative. I always think the worst. I assume it's rejection or negativity coming at me. And then we're super anxious or even depressed. And it feels almost autopilot-y. And I need you to understand that it does not have to be an autopilot response. Okay, so when we are children, right, when you're babies, your brain is really plastic. I'll probably use the term neuroplasticity quite a bit on this channel. It means that you are still forming your brain. You are still forming the way in which you respond to the world around you, right? So once your prefrontal cortex fully develops, it doesn't mean that you can't change your behaviors or you can't change your response systems. It just means that you have to try. It just means that there has to be more effort because we've built up this lifetime, depending on how old you are when you're watching this video, you've built up a lifetime of patterned responses, okay? So what this looks like is we have a trigger. The trigger might be that person in that example, that person not responding to your text. It also could just be a thought. It could be, am I getting fired from work tomorrow? It doesn't matter what it is, if it's psychosocial or if it's an actual physical trigger. You have that trigger, and what happens is your heart rate starts to increase when you think about this thing. Now, the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain does to the heart. What does that mean? It means when our heart rate increases, it starts to tell our brain, hey, we gotta look for something to fixate on. We gotta look for whatever is wrong because my body is telling me that something is wrong. Again, it doesn't matter if you can logically say, I know it's not that big of a deal. If you don't feel calm, you are sending your mind into an anxiety cycle, okay? So trigger, physical response, and then our mind starts to look for something wrong. And we probably find that thing that's wrong very quickly. The thing that I need you to understand here, and we're gonna unpack this in depth in later videos, but you might be choosing a story. So in other words, when you start to find out what's wrong or go look in your life for things that validate the negative feeling you're experiencing, you might be looking for validation from faulty grounding, okay? So a different example might be, and I use this example a lot, so if you're a client, you've heard this before. There was one morning where I was walking into work. I was nice and early. This is when I was still in the tech industry, and I wanted to impress my boss, and I wanted to make sure that, the company was going through layoffs. I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting laid off. So I was like really trying to work hard and impress them. And so I got to work really early, and I was hoping my boss would kind of like say, what's up? Or like, good to see you working hard. And I'm at my desk typing away, and my boss walks in, and then he walks right past me, and he doesn't say anything. And so in my mind, I'm already like, oh, I didn't get the acknowledgement that I wanted. Am I in trouble? And then my boss is like kind of in a funk all day. And I was like, oh God, this is it. I'm gonna get fired. And I start kind of freaking out, and I wind up doing less work at my job that day because I'm in such a spin cycle. I'm like, am I getting fired? Are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? My boss isn't talking to me. He's like in such a huff, but we haven't had a conversation about what's going on. And then I see this meeting invite pop up on my calendar, and I'm like, this is it, I'm getting fired. And I am fully convinced I'm getting fired. It doesn't matter how good I was at my job. It doesn't matter that like my job wasn't up for cuts within the company. I was convinced. I was sad, I cried in the bathroom, I was in a state. And I walked into the office, and my boss was like, hey, I'm sorry I've been such a grouch today. I just wanted to say hi. I had a rough morning. I got into a fender bender. How are you? So do you see how in that moment, on that day, I let an assumption or a story that I created, I let that totally overrun my entire day. It changed my physical state. It changed the output. It changed my mood that day. And then later, within just a few hours, I realized, or I was given the information, that the stuff I was creating in my mind was not at all valid. And this is probably a familiar circumstance to many of you, right? I mean, we all make assumptions and then we kind of just run with them. So in order to really break our anxiety spin cycle, it is so important that you start to look out for where your stories are, okay? So again, I'm gonna get into this in much greater detail probably in a week or two. But for right now, what I want you to remember is you have a trigger. It speeds up the heart rate. It tells your mind to go look for something, and then you fixate on something. So there's multiple points in this cycle where you actually have an opportunity to engage very consciously with your thoughts. Now I know that that cycle can feel like it happens in a split second, because it kind of does, but it doesn't mean that you can't try. It doesn't mean that you can't get involved in that conversation. So how do you do it? The beginning steps, as simple as it is, your first step is to get control of your heart rate. And you can probably understand why. If we can slow our heart rate down, it's going to send less freak out signals to the brain. Now, is that going to fix everything in one fell swoop? Sometimes, yeah. If you're freaking out about something really small and you just take a couple deep breaths, it'll be fine. But oftentimes when we're in sort of patterned spins of anxiety, there's themes and they go a little bit deeper. So in most situations, a couple deep breaths isn't going to solve everything because there's some cognitive and emotional unpacking that also needs to be done within the themes that are coming up in your life. But it is certainly a good start, and you can almost think about breathing as clearing the space. Now, I get a lot of clients who are like, I hate meditating. I can't meditate. Don't make me meditate. We're going to, but don't worry about that right now. We'll talk about that later. But for right now, all I need you to think about is exhaling. Okay, because what happens when we exhale is there's a nerve right around our heart. It's called the vagus nerve, V-A-G-U-S, not like Vegas, although that's fun. And so the vagus nerve when we take a deep breath out, vagus nerve is stimulated and it secretes this tranquilizing substance called vagus-off onto the heart. It asks the heart to beat at a slower rapidity, and if the heart is beating a little bit slower, guess what happens? We create a little bit more space between the frenetic heartbeat and the crazy messages we're sending to the brain. When the heart is beating at a slower rapidity, and we have that space to actually think about how we want to respond instead of dropping into our autopilot anxious response, we then have the opportunity to replace the negative or anxious thoughts with something that serves us better. This is the idea of negative thought replacement. This is a practice in traditional psychology. It is the method for reducing the amount of depressive or anxious thoughts that a person has over a period of time. So another way of saying that is when you know you have a default anxious thought and you are pretty sure it's not true, you need to proactively decide what you are going to think instead. And the next time you are triggered, you plug in that alternate thought. So it does not have to be equal and opposite. If you are really, really sad, your equal and opposite thought doesn't have to be, I'm super happy. You're probably not going to believe that. You're not going to connect to it. And then it feels like this is all an effort in futility. So perhaps in the example, if you're feeling really sad and lonely and full of despair, and that's the state of anxiety that you're in, perhaps some negative thought replacements might look like this. I'm feeling stuck right now, but I know I will find a way out of this. What I'm experiencing is temporary. I am so excited that I get to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be a new day. I am so excited that I get to try again. This is just a moment. This does not define me, right? There are, an infinite amount of replacement thoughts that you could potentially connect to. So that is the work. That is the beginning foundational work when you are experiencing anxiety, is you've got to figure out how to pull your heart rate down. This is one example. We're going to talk about a couple of others in other videos. And then you've got to look at what are the thoughts that need replacing? What are the false or negative beliefs that I'm allowing to sort of stir and sit in my system? And then how do I start choosing different thoughts? Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of us have patterns, right? Based on how you grew up or who you dated or the jobs you worked or whatever, there are probably really specific belief systems that you hold inside of yourself. And so often when we're struggling with anxiety, there's this feeling that we can't break past our negative belief systems about ourselves. So this practice of thought replacement is like dipping our toes in the pool of breaking down the beliefs or identity structures about ourselves that we don't actually need, the ones that are holding us back. The voices of not enoughness, of you can't do that, of life is hard, of everything has to be started, all that shit. By beginning the practice of stilling the mind and body and beginning the practice of choosing different thoughts, you are opening that door for massive, massive change. Okay? So, a couple of other things. We covered a lot of high-level stuff in this video. We're going to talk more about truth versus story. We are going to talk more about negative thought replacement. We're going to talk way more about calming your central nervous system down so that you have that space and you can build some trust in yourself. But what I want you to do for right now is just take these 2 tips and put it into practice this week, okay? See what comes up and see especially what is hard for you. I want you to pay attention to that with a non-judgmental approach. So if something is hard, or you don't believe the replacement thought, or whatever your pop-up struggle might be, let it just be there. Don't let it stop you, but be aware of it. Because the resistance to creating change is actually a part of the change that needs to be made. Does that make sense? So you pay attention to where your internal and external blocks are so that we can integrate it and we can start to work through it. This is the beginning. There is so much more to come. So if this video was helpful, if you learned something new, please feel free to leave a comment, like, subscribe, share, do your thing so we can help as many people as possible. And if you're coming up against anything or you want to share how this has gone for you, leave a comment in the comment box below. I would love to hear it. I do my best to respond, and I think that's it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you again in the next video.